Welcome to Dateline Abuja.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Well, let's begin by talking about the budget and the criticism in some quarters of the projection so far. First is the barrel per day that is going to be produced. Some say, considering the fact that we're now up to what you're projecting, that we may not be able to make the mark.
Currently, production is at 2.1 million barrels per day. The 2020 budget is based on 2.18 million barrels per day. However, in 2018, full year, we averaged 1.86. In the first half of 2019, we were under 1.9. But production had since, ramped up. At the moment, they are doing 2.1 million barrels. And it's important to note that in country, the capacity exists to go up to 2.5 million barrels per day. And on certain days over the last 1 year, they have indeed gone as high as 2.3 million barrels. The issue is the consistency of production. And sometimes there are disruptions. When the products are produced, they've got to go from the wells to the export terminals. Sometimes the loss is there due to either pipeline vandalization or even in some cases, the aging pipelines are giving way and products are leaking, and therefore, so these are not numbers. The production numbers are not just pulled from the sky. But I just wanted to take a moment and speak to which is the most important factor and the biggest fiscal issue as a country, which is revenue generation. There have been a lot of questions about whether the 8.15 trillion revenue projected is realistic. The two of things. First of all, from 2020, and this is an important issue that most people seem to have missed. Normally, what we capture in the federal government's budget is the operating surplus, the share of operating surplus of government-owned enterprises that they remit to the federal government. With 2020, we're saying to promote greater fiscal transparency, accountability, and comprehensiveness, that the budgets of these government-owned enterprises, those of them who are involved in governance, not running businesses like an NNPC that is an oil company, will now be gradually brought integrated fully into the federal government's budget. So for 2020, we're beginning with 10 of them. Their budgets are fully integrated in the budget of the federal government. So in that 8.155 trillion includes 554 billion naira of revenues that are retained and spent by those agencies that previously will not have been reflected in the federal government's budget. That's one important thing. Secondly, this budget envisages some activities next year that may be one-off or whatever. For instance, it envisages that there will be oil bid round, oil and gas, bid round next year. And so in the budget there, you have $1.5 billion projected to come from those bid rounds. There are a number of oil licenses and oil mining licenses that are now falling due for renewal. Okay, the renewal fees are also captured. There are also a few where it's in the interest of the holders of those licenses to go for early renewals, so they can make, and it's also in the interest of Nigeria, so they can make critical investment decisions. When you put all of those together, there's 939 billion naira projected from the new bid rounds and these licenses, which is in there.
The VAT is another issue. This is still at the stage of a bill. It hasn't been passed yet. Considering the fact that a lot of Nigerians cried out when they heard that it was going to be raised to 7.5, don't you think this is something you should be worried about? It's not yet a law.
Well, first of all, It's not yet a law, true, but I sincerely hope it becomes law. At 7.5, Nigeria's VAT rate still remains one of the lowest in the world. Okay, on the continent of Africa, the average VAT rate will be about 15%. And so our VAT rate is so low, there's no other way for it to go. All over the world, there's a shift from direct taxation to indirect taxation, to taxing consumption, because it's considered more progressive, more equitable. And Nigeria cannot be different. The matter of the necessity to increase our VAT rate had long since been settled. As far back as 9 years ago, it was supposed to happen. There were two things that were built to happen simultaneously. One was to raise the VAT rate to 10% and then reduce the personal income tax rates. The personal income tax rates were reduced, the VAT rate wasn't reduced. The government, chickened out at the last moment. In the economic recovery and growth plan, it stated clearly that the VAT rate will be raised. In fact, the ERGP envisaged that the VAT rate may be raised to as high as 15% for certain luxury goods by 2020, between 2017 and 2020. And we're talking about 7.5%. The government has moderated the increase, taking into cognizance the fact that the economy is still in recovery state from the recession, and therefore it's important not to take measures that may affect the pace of growth. When the government during the negotiation with labor for the minimum wage, the government set up a Presidential Technical Advisory Committee, which was headed by Bismarck Rewane, and had people, economists and from the private and the public sector. That committee recommended the 7.5% increase. It was that committee that recommended an increase to 7.5% rather than the higher rate that was being contemplated. And it's important to understand that VAT is about, the entire economy. It's not about the federal government. The federal government only gets a 15% share of the VAT. So if you look at the federal government's 2020 budget, VAT contributes only 292 billion to projected revenues. That's 3% thereabout of the revenues that the federal government is projecting for 2020. So this is not about the federal government itself. 85% of the VAT proceeds go to the subnational governments, the states and the local governments. 50% to the states, 35% to the local governments. So this federal government is not pushing this itself. However, it's clear that even those other tiers of government, are struggling fiscally and need, this to be able to make them more fiscally sustainable.
Well, thank you for staying with us. We have a few of your reactions to our last conversation on Nigeria's 59 years of journey to nationhood. I have this particular one from Amuda Oyewale, and it says, corruption in Nigeria should be tackled in its entirety. We should not limit the fight only on financial corruption, but poor administration and lack of patriotism. Our leaders should start thinking of Nigeria by enforcement of laws that will compel everyone to enroll their children in public schools and be forced to attend hospitals in Nigeria. Doing these will restore lost glories of public institutions and reduce cost of governance arising from medical tourism. I must thank you very much, Amuda, for that contribution. Now, we would like to hear from you, especially on our conversation today, which is the 2020 budget estimates. You can also react to reports of kidnapping in Kuje Area Council here in the FCT. Send your views and comments using the email address and Twitter handles on your screen. Also be sure to share anything happening within your locality. You may watch any episode of the program on YouTube. Thank you for watching. I'm Ibrahim Adra. We'll see you again next time.